Внимание! Пуск!
Есть.
A nuclear first strike on the United States would take about 30 minutes to wipe every airbase, every missile silo, every command center on American soil off the map. And the attacker would still lose. Because the thing that answers isn't on land. It's somewhere under the ocean right now, inside a ship whose exact position nobody on this planet knows, including the United States Navy. That is the entire logic that has kept this world from burning for 65 years, and it rests on a single assumption, that deep water still hides people. That assumption is starting to fail. So how does 18,000 tons of steel disappear in open ocean? Has anyone ever actually caught one? And if so, how? And if today's technology really can strip the ocean bare, what happens to the promise the whole country is leaning on? You may think you already know a fair amount about American ballistic missile submarines. Stay with us, because the most dangerous thing aboard that ship is not the missile. Part 3. The sea. This is Future War Tech. This is the last episode of 3, and we saved this leg for last on purpose. Bombers can be destroyed on the runway before they ever roll. Missile silos sit in one place, coordinates unchanged for 50 years. An adversary can pre-aim at every one of them. Both of those legs can be solved on paper. The one under the water can't. It guarantees something nothing else can. No matter how brutal the opening blow, the answer still comes. That's what collapses an enemy's attack math before he even finishes running it. Now let's go under the water and look at what carries that promise. This is the Ohio class, the largest submarine the United States has ever built. And 4 decades after the first hull went in the water, it still holds that title. 560 feet, close to 2 football fields end to end, moving through the ocean without making enough noise for anyone to hear it. 18,750 tons submerged, twice the displacement of an Arleigh Burke destroyer, the workhorse warship of the American fleet. But size isn't what's frightening here. Look at the middle of the hull. 20 launch tubes standing vertical in 2 rows, and the total number of nuclear warheads one of these carries on a single patrol is roughly 90. 90. On its face, that doesn't sound like much. There are close to 12,000 nuclear warheads in the world. So let me show you what 90 actually means. North Korea's entire nuclear arsenal, the thing that has Northeast Asia building missile shields, the thing that has shaped the foreign policy of 4 American presidencies, is estimated at around 50 warheads. Israel's entire arsenal, the most tight-lipped nuclear program on Earth, runs around 90, which means this one ship carries more nuclear firepower than the country of North Korea, and roughly as much as the country of Israel. If that submarine were a nation, it would rank 8th or 9th among the nuclear powers of the world, and the United States has 14 of them. Those 14 ships carry roughly 70% of every strategic nuclear warhead America has deployed. 70% of the deterrent of the most powerful nation on the planet is not in concrete silos and not on runways. It's floating underwater in places nobody knows. They operate out of 2 ports, Bangor, Washington, facing the Pacific, and Kings Bay, Georgia, facing the Atlantic. But that's the last time you'll see them on a map. From the moment one clears the harbor, an Ohio disappears from every chart in the world, including the Pentagon's. This has been running without a break since November of 1960, when USS George Washington left Charleston and stayed underwater for 66 straight days. 4 months before that, the same boat had made history, the first ballistic missile ever fired from beneath the surface of the sea. The message her captain sent to the White House that afternoon was 1 line long. Polaris, from out of the deep to target. Perfect. From that day to this morning, there has not been a single day when America didn't have at least one of these submerged somewhere, carrying missiles, waiting on an order that never comes. Not Christmas, not the calmest years the world has ever had. Now look at what's inside those 20 tubes. The Trident 2D5, 44 feet tall, a 4-story building standing upright inside a ship's hull. 130,000 pounds, heavier than a fully loaded 18-wheeler. Range, more than 4,600 miles, farther than the flight from Los Angeles to London. Inside the nose sit independently targeted warheads, each aimed at its own separate target, tens of miles apart, released at the edge of space and arriving almost simultaneously. The lighter one, the W-76, yields about 100 kilotons. The heavier one, the W-88, about 475. The word kiloton is easy to hear without feeling anything, so let's stop here for one beat. The bomb dropped on Hiroshima was about 15 kilotons. A single W-88 is more than 30 times that, and one missile carries several of them. And now here's the number that makes everything above genuinely dangerous. Since 1989, the Trident 2D5 has logged more than 190 successful test launches. No other large ballistic missile anywhere in the world has a record like that. Not Russia's, not China's, nobody's. And what does that actually buy? It means an adversary cannot plan around the possibility that it fails. For a deterrent, that matters more than yield, because what prevents a war isn't the bomb, it's the certainty that the bomb will work. And to understand why that record is so hard to earn, look at the problem this missile has to solve, a problem a silo-based missile never faces. A Minuteman knows exactly where it is. Its silo was surveyed down to the centimeter, and it hasn't moved in 50 years. The entire flight path is calculated from a fixed point on the Earth. The Trident has the opposite situation. It launches from a ship that's drifting somewhere in the open ocean after that ship has spent weeks underwater without seeing the sky and without taking a single navigation signal from outside. The submarine only knows where it thinks it is, and a small error at the starting point becomes a miles-wide error 4,000 miles downrange. The American solution was to reach back for the oldest trick in seafaring. Midway through flight, once it's above the atmosphere, the missile opens an eye and looks up at the stars. A star tracker compares the real sky against a star catalog stored in its computer, works out exactly where it is in space, and corrects the rest of the trajectory. The same principle sailors use to cross oceans for hundreds of years. The difference is that it does it in seconds, traveling more than 13,000 miles an hour. The result? An accuracy of roughly 300 feet after more than 4,600 miles of flight. Cross the Atlantic and land inside a football field. One more detail that anyone who watched Part 2 will catch immediately. A Minuteman lights its motor inside the silo. Flame down, the whole silo turns into a chimney. A Trident isn't allowed to do that, for a reason that needs no explanation. Nobody wants to ignite a rocket motor inside a submarine. It gets pushed out by gas pressure instead. A 65-ton missile rises silently, like a cork, punches through the surface, and only then lights its engine, already in open air. They call it a cold launch. The ship below doesn't even shudder. But none of that is worth anything if the ship can be found. Which brings us to the real question of this episode, and to the thing we promised you at the top. The most dangerous thing on this submarine isn't the missile, it's the silence. The first thing to understand is that underwater, everything you're used to stops working. Radar doesn't penetrate, light dies after a few dozen feet, satellites looking down see nothing but surface. Exactly one thing travels well in seawater: sound. And that collapses the entire war beneath the ocean into a single question: who makes noise first? So, on a nuclear submarine, what's the loudest thing aboard? Not the propeller, not the engines, it's the pumps. A nuclear reactor produces enormous heat, and that heat has to be carried away continuously or the reactor destroys itself. The normal way to do that is to pump coolant through the core, big pumps running around the clock. And pumps vibrate. Vibration travels into the hull. The hull passes it into the water, and water carries sound for tens of miles, which means the very thing that gives this ship unlimited endurance is also the thing that gives it away. The American fix is both simple and elegant. Hot water is lighter and rises. Cool water is heavier and sinks. Put the reactor and the heat exchanger at the right heights relative to each other, and the coolant will circulate on its own in a closed loop, up hot, down cool, with no pump at all. They call it natural circulation. At patrol speed, the Ohio's reactor runs entirely that way. The pumps shut down, and the loudest source on the ship disappears. Picture what that means. A nuclear reactor at work, driving 18,000 tons of steel across an ocean in near total silence. The rest is a design discipline that borders on obsession. Machinery aboard isn't bolted hard to the hull. It sits on isolation rafts floating on flexible mounts. Vibration born in one place dies in that place, never reaching the hull, never reaching the water. The outer hull is covered in a sound-absorbing coating that swallows enemy sonar instead of returning it. The 7-bladed propeller is shaped for one purpose. The water must not boil as it passes. A collapsing bubble is a sound, and a sound is a position. Inside, sailors don't slam doors, they don't drop tools, they don't run in the passageways. That mindset didn't appear on its own. It came from Admiral Hyman Rickover, the man who built the American nuclear navy, and the man who imposed the rule that on a submarine, there is no such thing as a small detail. Every valve, every weld, every bolt is a potential noise source, and a noise source is a death sentence. The most convincing evidence that all of it works doesn't come from an exercise, it comes from an accident. In February of 2009, in the middle of the Atlantic, the British ballistic missile submarine HMS Vanguard and the French Le Triomphant ran straight into each other. Two allied nations, two boats loaded with nuclear weapons, two of the most advanced sonar suites on Earth, and neither one detected the other until their hulls touched. If two allies couldn't find each other while colliding, consider the problem facing an adversary trying to hunt down one Ohio somewhere in the Pacific, a body of water more than 30 times the size of the United States. Which is exactly why the Soviets, after years of hunting the open ocean and coming up empty, changed tactics completely. During the Cold War, the US Navy ran a ballistic missile submarine base at Holy Loch, Scotland. The problem with Holy Loch was that every boat leaving it had to transit one narrow channel before reaching open water. Out in the ocean, nobody could find them. But in that channel, you didn't have to find anything. You just had to know where to wait. And the Soviets waited. In November of 1974, the ballistic missile submarine USS James Madison left Holy Loch for her patrol station, carrying 16 Poseidon nuclear missiles. Just outside the harbor, a Soviet Victor-class attack submarine was lying in wait to trail her. The two boats collided. Both surfaced. The Soviet boat submerged again and left. The Madison went back to the yard with a 9-foot gash along her side, and the whole thing stayed buried for 43 years. It was only confirmed in 2017 when the CIA declassified a cable from National Security Advisor Brent Scowcroft to Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, reporting that an American Poseidon submarine had collided with a Soviet boat waiting outside the harbor to follow her. Think carefully about what that means. If an adversary can trail a ballistic missile submarine from the moment it leaves port all the way to its patrol box, the entire promise of this leg collapses. Not because the ship gets sunk, but because somebody always knows where it is. That is why today, the approaches to American ballistic missile submarine bases are among the most heavily guarded stretches of water on the planet. Not to protect the boat from attack, to protect the first few dozen miles, the only stretch where it can still be followed. Once it's out there, it's gone, but it has to get out there first. That invisibility creates a problem almost nobody thinks about. Ordinary radio doesn't reach deep water. The boat isn't allowed to surface, and it isn't allowed to transmit. So if the President of the United States gives a launch order, how does that order reach a submarine hiding in a place the Navy itself can't pinpoint? The answer is something we met back in Part 1, the E-6B Mercury, TACAMO. It flies a slow orbit at altitude, streams out a wire antenna miles long hanging nearly straight down, and transmits on very low frequency, the only band that reaches the depth where the boat is waiting. 3 episodes, 1 system. The aircraft that opened this series in Part 1 turns out to be the single thread connecting the White House to the leg in Part 3. The nuclear triad was never 3 separate weapons. It's one machine, and every part of it exists to guarantee one thing, that the answer always gets through. There's a price for that silence, and it isn't paid in dollars. A deterrent patrol runs about 77 days, 2.5 months underwater. No windows, no sky, no news. Passageways so narrow 2 men have to turn sideways to pass. The lights go red at night, a night defined by the watch schedule, not by the sun. Sailors don't call home, no email. Nothing goes out, because anything that goes out could become a position. The only thing allowed in is called a familygram. A few dozen words sent by family, screened before it's transmitted down, a handful per patrol. And it runs one direction only. The sailor reads it and cannot reply, which means a man can read that his child has been born and not send back a single word. He can read that his father has died somewhere in the middle of the Pacific and stand his watch the next morning like any other morning. No flight home, no funeral, nobody to call. And they sign up for that twice a year, year after year. Sometimes the price runs higher than that. In 1963, USS Thresher went down on a deep dive, 129 men. In 1968, USS Scorpion never came home, 99. Those 2 losses produced SUBSAFE, a safety standard so severe that the Navy has not lost a certified SUBSAFE submarine since. But there's a fact about the Ohio class you need to know, and it isn't easy listening. These boats are aging out, not technologically obsolete, physically old. The Ohio class was designed for a 30-year service life, the first one commissioned in 1981, but its replacement came too late. So the Navy had to stretch the entire class to 42 years, half again beyond the original design. And 42 years is a hard ceiling, not a budget ceiling, a steel ceiling. Every time the boat dives to depth and comes back up, the pressure hull is squeezed and released. Each cycle leaves behind a tiny amount of metal fatigue in the steel and in the welds. After 4 decades and thousands of cycles, that accumulated fatigue becomes something you track boat by boat, weld by weld. And there's a detail that's harsher still. Unlike every other class of American nuclear submarine, the Ohio's reactor compartment was designed with no provision for midlife refueling. When the core runs out, the ship retires. There is no engineering workaround. The first Ohio retires in 2027. This is a countdown clock that no Congress and no budget can stop. But don't confuse old with weak. Today, after more than 40 years, an Ohio is still one of the most terrifying machines ever built. Still unfindable, still carrying 90 warheads, still capable, with nothing more than what sits in those 20 tubes, of ending a country. The problem isn't that it's gotten weaker. The problem is that steel doesn't care how frightening it is. Look at what America is building to replace it. The Columbia class, 12 boats, replacing 14 Ohios. And let's be direct about something. This is the #1 acquisition program in the United States Department of Defense. Not one of the top priorities. #1. If the Ohio is a ghost, the Columbia is designed to be a ghost that leaves no trace at all. It carries the same Trident II D5. There's no reason to replace something that has worked flawlessly for 35 years, but only 16 tubes instead of 20. Everything else was redesigned from a blank sheet around a single goal: quieter. On an Ohio, the turbine drives the propeller shaft through a massive mechanical reduction gear. Gear teeth mesh against gear teeth, and gears always make noise. a very distinctive noise that sonar operators are trained to recognize instantly. Columbia deletes the reduction gear entirely. The turbine spins a generator. The generator feeds a motor. The motor turns the shaft. An entire family of sound vanishes from the ship. The stern changes from a cross to an X for better control close to the bottom. The propeller is replaced by a pump jet, with the blades hidden inside a shroud. And the reactor carries enough fuel for the life of the ship. It never needs refueling. That sounds dry, but the consequence is enormous. A refueling overhaul costs 2 to 3 years in the yard. Eliminating it means 12 Columbias can do the work that used to take 14 Ohios. The price tag matches the ambition. Columbia alone, roughly $132 billion to procure, with lifetime costs estimated near $348 billion. Zoom out, and according to the Congressional Budget Office, the Sea Legs programs will run about $204 billion over 10 years, with the entire American nuclear force, all 3 legs, projected around $946 billion in the same period. Nearly $1 trillion for a weapon system whose only purpose is to never be used. Behind the boat comes the next round, the Trident II D5LE2, and with it, the W93, the first new American nuclear warhead program in nearly 40 years. Not an upgrade, not a life extension, a new design. But here's the part that should worry you. In Part 2, the Sentinel program overran so badly it triggered a review before Congress. But if Sentinel slips, the Minuteman missiles are still sitting in their silos and can serve a few more years. Not here. The Ohio has already been stretched to its physical limit. If Columbia slips, that slip isn't a line in a budget report. It's a real gap in the leg the entire Triad leans on. The first hull, USS District of Columbia, was about 65% complete as of February 2026. The Navy is targeting delivery in 2028, after the program had already slid more than a year. There's one more detail almost nobody noticed, and it changed this past February. Every Ohio was originally built with 24 launch tubes, not 20. In 2017, the United States plugged 4 tubes on every boat to comply with the New START treaty. Under that same treaty, the Tridents were not loaded to their maximum warhead capacity. On February 5, 2026, New START expired. For the first time since 1972, there is no legal limit on the strategic arsenals of the United States or Russia, which means those 4 caps can come off, and those missiles can be loaded heavier. According to analysis from the Federation of American Scientists, uploading the submarine fleet alone could theoretically add 800 to 900 warheads. The more realistic figure is 400 to 500. No new ships. No nuclear test, just bring the boat into port, open the hatches, and load more. For decades, the deep ocean was a game the United States practically owned. That's changing, and it changed this year. Russia currently operates 8 Beret and Beret A ballistic missile submarines, with plans to reach 12. The newest, Knyaz Pozharsky, entered service in July 2025. She's larger than an Ohio, around 24,000 tons submerged, and each boat carries 16 Bulava missiles. But the interesting thing about Russia isn't the boat, it's how they use it. Russia doesn't try to thread submarines through NATO-controlled choke points to reach the mid-Atlantic. They keep them inside what's called a bastion, Arctic waters and the seas off Kamchatka, under the protection of their own Air Force, surface fleet, and attack submarines. Bulava's range is enough to reach North America from inside that pocket. It's a completely different philosophy. America hides its boats in the sheer size of the ocean. Russia hides its boats behind an entire military. And then came July 6, 2026. China launched a ballistic missile from a nuclear submarine into the Pacific, and then said so publicly. It was the first time Beijing had ever announced a strategic launch from a submarine into those waters. The United States, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand all responded within days. Analysts assessed the missile as most likely a JL-3, with a range over 6,200 miles. That number matters far more than the optics of the launch. At that range, a Chinese submarine no longer has to risk running out into the open Pacific. It can sit in a coastal bastion, the South China Sea, the Bohai Gulf, and still reach the continental United States, the same model Russia has used for decades. But China still has a gap, and it may be the most telling number in this whole story. To sustain continuous deterrent patrols, always at least one boat at sea, a country needs a minimum of about 5 ballistic missile submarines, 1 on patrol, 1 returning, 1 working up, and 2 in maintenance and crew turnover. China has roughly 6 Type 094 and 094A boats, but its ability to hold a continuous patrol is still not assessed as complete. The next generation, the Type 096, is expected to be substantially quieter. And that is the development American planners are watching hardest. Not the missile, the noise. Look at this comparison, and you'll see the whole picture on the ocean floor today. Boats: the United States, 14 Ohios. Russia, 8 Berets heading for 12. China, roughly 6 Type 094s. Tubes per boat: 20 for the Americans, 16 for the Russians, 12 for the Chinese. Strategy: America hides in open ocean, Russia hides in an Arctic bastion, China hides in a coastal bastion. And on the thing that matters most, the ability to hold a continuous patrol, Russia has it, China's isn't complete, and America has done it without missing a single day for 65 years. Across all 3 episodes of this series, this is the one leg where the United States leads outright. And it doesn't lead on numbers, it leads on 6 decades of doing something nobody else has managed. Now we come back to the crack we mentioned at the top of this episode. The entire value of this leg rests on one thing: nobody can find it. Take that away, and everything else stops mattering. 190 successful tests, irrelevant. The W-88, irrelevant. 300 feet of accuracy, natural circulation, 65 years of silence, all of it irrelevant, because a submarine that's continuously trailed is just a stationary target that happens to be underwater. Exactly what the Soviets tried to pull off at Holy Loch in 1974. Except this time, nobody has to wait outside the harbor. First, the fiber optic cables on the seafloor. They were laid to carry the world's internet, but it turns out you can measure minute strain in the glass when something passes nearby. In principle, a transoceanic cable becomes a microphone thousands of miles long. The infrastructure is already down there, and it was installed for an entirely different reason. Second, swarms of unmanned vehicles, solar-powered autonomous surface craft, cheap, mass-producible, carrying sonar and magnetometers, loitering at sea for weeks with nobody aboard. They don't each have to be good, there just have to be enough of them. Third, and most concerning, artificial intelligence. The core problem in submarine hunting was never a shortage of data. The ocean is deafening. The problem has always been pulling one faint signal out of an ocean of noise. That happens to be precisely the kind of problem machine learning is getting better at, fast. A study from the National Security College at the Australian National University asked the question directly: will science and technology make the oceans transparent? Their conclusion, looking out to the 2050s, was that it is likely, meaning ballistic missile submarines will become detectable despite advances in counter-detection. But this is where we're not going to follow the crowd, because the other side of this argument is strong, and the man making it is not an outsider. In 2016, Rear Admiral Charles Richard, who would go on to command United States Strategic Command, the officer ultimately responsible for the entire American nuclear arsenal, published a piece whose title called the whole idea "The Mirage of a Transparent Ocean." The argument on that side is specific. Detecting something once is not the same as tracking it continuously. A sensor that holds contact for a few minutes is a world away from staying on a boat for 77 days through thermal layers, salinity layers, and bottom terrain, all of which bend sound in ways that are hard to predict. Drones run out of power, cables don't move, and the ocean is absurdly, unreasonably large. And that is exactly why the entire Columbia class was designed around one word: quieter. The race hasn't stopped. It's just shifted from hiding well to hiding well against machines that get smarter every year. Nobody knows which side is right. That is the uncomfortable part. The whole of American nuclear deterrence, built over 6 decades and consuming close to $1 trillion a decade, is riding on an unresolved scientific question: whether deep water can still hide people now that machines are learning how to look. 3 episodes in, you can finally see why it has to be 3. The air leg can be recalled. It gives human beings time to realize they were wrong. The land leg can't be recalled, but it forces an enemy to spend hundreds of weapons just to deal with it, and in doing so, expose his entire intent. And the sea leg can't be found, so it can't be killed. It simply guarantees that the answer comes. No single strike on Earth can take down all 3 at once. Anyone contemplating a first strike against the United States has to solve 3 completely different problems simultaneously. One about speed, one about volume, and one with no solution at all. It's that last one that keeps the math from ever working out. The boat stays silent so it won't be found. The crew stays silent so the boat won't be found. And the Triad exists so that it never has to speak. This is the strangest weapon humanity has ever built, one whose success is measured by never being used. Every other weapon system proves its worth the day it fires. This one proves its worth every day it doesn't. 65 years of unbroken patrol, trillions of dollars, tens of thousands of people, and the only measure of all of it is that nothing has happened. Right now, out there, a submarine is running deep. Its crew doesn't know what today's news is. Their families don't know where they are. And in the moment you're hearing this sentence, someone is standing a watch beside a key in a career built entirely around never having to turn it. In 1960, a captain sent Washington one line: from out of the deep to target. 65 years later, the promise still holds. Still down there, still silent. The only question left is how much longer the ocean can keep it. 3 episodes, 3 legs, 1 machine. If you came in on this one, the sky and the ground are waiting at the top of the playlist. And Part 1 answers a question Part 3 just opened. The one leg that can be recalled, who actually has the authority to recall it? This is future war tech.